There we go. One more time, please, for Steve and Neve. A really fantastic discussion. And if you did come in late, you will be able to hear the recording of that interview on the Pricing Music podcast in a couple of weeks, which is more indicative of what we talk about rather than just Bob the Builder trivia. We also talk about Baby Shark a lot, right, Stu? So a lot of data on that coming up. Now, on to our first, or the next track of the day, which is the future of streaming, super premium tiers. We're taking a look at the future of streaming from a structural and subscriber perspective. And clearly streaming's at an inflection point as subscriber growth slows down or plateaus, depending on how you want to look at it. DSPs are finding new ways to increase revenue via new services, offers, and tiers. And to kick us off, we're very happy to welcome back a good friend of Music Ally, Mark Mulligan of MIDiA Research, and he's going to show us what the state of play is and what users want next and why. So a very warm round of applause, please, for Mark.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so before I dive in, Paul Brindley sort of tasked me with bringing some little historical nugget that's relevant to where we are, because I did it at the last Music Ally conference. So I dug deep. We are in the porter tun. The porter tun means big cask of porter beer. Now, unless you're a real ale drinker, you're probably not going to know what porter beer is. So porter beer was made for big, burly porters. In fact, they're so big and burly, they called it porter stout. And that's where stout comes from. Now, the thing is, when they made it, and right here they made it, to begin with, what used to happen, this is back in the 1700s, they used to make the beer and send it out straight away to the pubs. And that was called mild. And then the pubs would go and let it age a bit, and they became what were called stales. Now, this was obviously the days before brand marketing, because I don't think anybody would try to sell a stale these days. But eventually they realized that, why don't we do that ourselves? So they started doing it and sending it out, and it's called porter stout. And it became so popular, and it got exported to Ireland. And then this little brewery in Ireland called Guinness started to make it, and they called it porter stout. And then 100 years after they've been making it, they decided to drop the porter and just called it stout. So anybody who thinks they're drinking a good glass of Irish Guinness, they're actually drinking a good glass of English porter stout. I can say that my surname's Mulligan, I can just about get away with it. And for those of you like your Guinness, it used to be a lot stronger. It used to be 7%, and the reason it's not 7% anymore is because during the Napoleonic Wars, they had to reduce the alcohol content to be able to keep up with the taxation levels. So there you go, history lesson done. Thank you. Now, a very mini music history lesson to go into this. Darren Hemmings, who's on stage next, he in his newsletter yesterday had a reference to some letter that had been written 15, 20 years ago talking about the dire straits of small venues, and the point that Darren was making is that, it's like history repeating itself. And it got me thinking about the Steve Albini, the problem with music piece from about 30 years ago. And in there, he's talking about things like artists getting screwed with bad contracts and recoupment and producers using too much compression on tracks. And it's like, yeah, that's still true today. And actually what's happening, I would say it's not so much history repeating itself. It's just that there are so many structural problems in the music industry that have never been fixed. And so what we're going to walk through in the future streaming is a lot about the things that do need to be, the problems which are arising in streaming. And if we don't fix them, it's just one other set of problems. So we'll look back in 20 years and say, oh, look, all those streaming problems are still here, along with all of those live venue problems, along with all of those artist contract problems. So we keep layering problems on top. And one of the reasons the problems are still here is because they're not problems for everyone. There are lots of larger entities within music industry value chains who actually benefit from some of these. But it gets to the point where even larger entities can't grapple with too many problems. And I think we're at a turning point with streaming where we really do need to almost decide what is streaming. And I know it sounds like a bit of a trite question, but if you rewind to say 2008, when Danielette was just sort of getting going with Spotify, you essentially had two types of consumers. Those who listen to a bit of music, quite like a bit of music, listen to the radio mainly, maybe buy some music for Christmas or, occasional album now and then. And if you're really lucky, they'd maybe go to a concert or two a year. And then you had the hardcore music fans who would buy loads of music, or probably by that stage download loads of it from P2P networks, but they would go to loads of concerts and everything else. If you look in the live music stage, everybody's been brought up. Going to concerts is much more mainstream now. You go into the music side, everybody's been brought up as well. Those passive consumers are now spending a good amount of money. But in the process, because it all happens in the same place, streaming has been really optimized for the passive massive, which means that it's harder for music aficionados, superfans, whatever you want to call them, to be superfans all the time, because there's so much music filling our ears so much of the time, we're all turned into passives. So that's the challenge, the sort of two set of challenges. It's like, what do we want streaming to be? And then understanding if we don't head on address some of these things, something else will fill some of the gaps. So with all of that preamble, I'm not going to shy away. Change will be changed, but you'll see what I mean. So first of all, where we are now. This might surprise you. Music streaming, this is looking at monthly, weekly, and daily users. This is data for US, UK, Canada, Australia, France, Germany, Sweden, South Korea, and Brazil, so quite a good mix of markets. Radio is still there. Radio has still got a really big role. Now, it's not all music radio, absolutely not, but radio's still got a really big role. So music streaming and radio, you've still got these two things still coexisting after all of this time. But when we look at how streaming is being used, in some ways we're at the stage where it's actually can be quite misleading to talk about streaming trends. It's the same way of saying, well, what is YouTube? Well, YouTube is 1,000,001 different things to different people. And I think we've got to that stage with streaming where it is also many things to different people. And the biggest differences we see is how older versus younger consumers use it. One of the bits that isn't highlighted there, you look at the listen to songs on request. On repeat, massively skewing towards younger users. And what you have is streaming at the moment is able to basically support lots of different use cases, but at some stage, we get to the point where if it is more and more of what streaming is about lean back, friction-free listening, then whereas if you think about, say, what AI music is doing, AI music is making it really easy to make stuff, and actually sometimes things can be too easy. And that's one of the things I'm going to come back to in a moment, is should there be some friction in the music listening experience? You think about a teenager crate digging. Think about how much that album is going to mean to them that they're going to take home versus 20 or 30 songs that have appeared in their new music playlist on a Friday. And this is just a little reminder, streaming is not all about Spotify. Spotify is absolutely dominant, but there is a really strong long tail of decent-sized streaming services. And the one which I think really it doesn't really fly under the radar, but maybe doesn't get quite the attention it should, is SoundCloud. Because if you look at the overlaps, you look at the service which people are most likely to use as well as a subscription service, it's SoundCloud. And why? Because SoundCloud, not only because of its slightly different way of its licensing, I'm trying to be diplomatic there, but basically you've got a lot of stuff there you won't find elsewhere, but it's also one which has got much more heavy in terms of social, comments and likes, direct connection between the artist and the fan. I mean, literally direct connection. You can go and message, a fan directly. And YouTube has also always been that on YouTube as a whole, but YouTube Music last year started introducing some of these things as well. And I think that idea of community and connection, about expressing who we are, if you think particularly among, people when they're in their teens or through to the mid-20s, There might be 1,000,001 different things competing for our attention, but music is the thing that normally identifies us most, the thing that expresses our identity the most. And streaming in the West, it's really different in China, but streaming in the West to date hasn't done a very good job of that, allowing people to say who they are. Now, the following panel's being talking about Supremium, and here's the really interesting thing. Even though, Supremium is like, maybe the train that's never going to arrive, but, there is nonetheless, not only is there really good industry rationale for, for trying to bring more into streaming, consumers are actually really, really willing to not only pay, but pay a lot. I won't go into the details of this because it's a really complex methodology that I don't fully understand either. I've got other people who do, and colleagues who do, but this is a really long, detailed survey where we ended up finding that the best price point, the bit that coincides with the best set of features, most level of demand, is over $11 extra on top of a standard subscription. Now, it doesn't mean that suddenly people will go and double the amount they're paying for subscriptions, but what it does show is there is appetite there. People do value music enough that they will pay significantly more to get something more. But what they'll pay for is maybe not what you'd think. Right? You might think, it's going to be all the behind-the-scenes stuff and exclusive access to the artist. That's not what people want to pay for. Why? Because that's already there. That's what Instagram does. That's what TikTok does. We already give all of that really valuable stuff away for free. Instead, in an age of ubiquity where everybody can have everything, people want the things that other people can't have. They want the scarcity. Right? And if you rewind 20 years ago and somebody's saying, have you heard this album? Yeah, I've got that. It meant something because you'd gone and spent some of your money to go and get that album. Now, yeah, I've heard that. Well, anybody can hear it, but I've heard it and you haven't yet because you're not paying for this, you're not paying to get it. That shows I'm more of a fan than you are. So there's definitely bragging rights associated. So where we should go. I'm not going to walk through all of these, but there's a lot of change is happening. And in some ways, this change can catch up with us unawares, because these things are happening quick enough to really reshape what it means to be in the music industry as a label, an artist manager, whatever it might be, but slow enough that we don't see the change happening. I always used to go to a quote I love, which is, everything's different, but all along I thought it was the same. And I thought it was some clever sort of 19th century novelist, and I think Stuart pointed out to me, no, it's actually Calvin and Hobbes. But anyway, it still stands. And I think we're at this point where we're beginning to realize that some of this stuff is growing pains of streaming. Some of this stuff is, but streaming doesn't do this well enough. And, I'm sure AI is going to be spoken about a lot throughout today and probably spoken about a lot yesterday, and I'll do the contractual commitment and quickly talk about it now. We're just wrapping up our numbers sizing the AI market last year. Revenue's more than doubled. The number of users was close to about tripling. Number of people paying went up massively as well. What's happening is this isn't so much music creators. This is consumers learning to do stuff. If you carry on at the trajectory we're at now, 5 or 6 years from now, there will be nearly as many people making music with AI as playing traditional instruments. Is streaming the home for AI? Should it be there? Questions, absolutely big ones, but what is clear is that we are entering an era where people want to actually create as entertainment, not simply creating for, the way that traditionally, we thought about music creation. Music is doing really well. It's really standing up in terms of time spent, but of all the things that we do, it is the thing that is most likely to be the thing we're not paying attention to. Right? And we've got, we fill our days with music. Music has become the sonic wallpaper to our daily routines. It's just there. And whereas that's fantastic, it's a great utility, but, water's a utility, and we don't sort of, normally make sort of a song and dance about how great the wet stuff is coming out of a tap. So there is some risk associated with that. And also, with the exceptions of SoundCloud and YouTube and Chinese streaming apps, that sense of community isn't there, yet particularly among Gen Z and Gen Alpha, we're beginning to see more and more demand for community and connection. And if we think about the things that defined the last 10 years of the digital era, it was all about ubiquity and convenience and anonymity and all of those sorts of things. Actually, we're beginning to see the pendulum shift, and younger consumers wanted to have connection and wanted to have things sort of taking a bit more time. So to finish, we love an acronym at MIDiA. This is the BEATS framework. I'm just going to pull out two things. One is add friction. That teenager crate digging, that is friction. And friction doesn't need to mean bad. I mean, if you think about the entire global games industry, it is built on friction. And then rate limits. We're at the stage where simply everything everywhere all the time is no longer a good thing. It's beginning to be bad for everybody. And with that, I'm going to, because I have got 11 seconds left, say, if you like what you've heard, we've got a couple of reports in here, go and get them. But the future of streaming is community, connection, friction, and rate limits. Thank you very much.